Now my pleasure to introduce our guest speaker, Adjunct Professor Sue Murphy. Sue graduated as a civil engineer from the University of Western Australia in 1979, and after winning a Clough scholarship as an undergraduate, she joined Clough Engineering in 1980, commencing what would be a 25-year career in that organisation. 12 years in the field as a site engineer and project manager led to corporate roles and to appointment in 1998 as the first woman on the board of Clough Engineering Limited. In 2004, Sue joined the Water Corporation of Western Australia with responsibilities for delivering capital projects and long-term and short-term planning. 2 years later, on the 6th of November 2008, she was appointed as the Chief Executive Officer of the Water Corporation. For the past 5 years, Sue has been listed in the top 100 most influential engineers in Australia by Engineers Australia, and during 2013 she was honoured with the prestigious Sir John Holland Civil Engineer of the Year Award by the Board of the College of Civil Engineers Australia. She was also elected as an Honorary Fellow of the Institution of Engineers Australia. Last year, Sue was presented with the International Association of Australia's Women of Water Award, and given her background in this field, it is no surprise that tonight she has accepted our invitation to speak on the topic, Water Forever, Whatever the Weather. Please welcome Adjunct Professor Sue Murphy.
Thanks, Warren. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I too acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we're meeting and pay my respects to elders past and present. I also thank Convocation for delivering me a captive audience with whom I can share my passion for sustainable water services to make WA a great place to live and invest. Now, you've already been through a long meeting, so my speech, which I had planned to deliver over the next 90 minutes, I'll shorten for you. And if you think I'm joking, just try asking some questions. So, on a lighter note, or perhaps not a lighter note, why on earth would anyone be interested in water in Western Australia, especially water in the southwest part of the state where most of our population live? Now, I've got a series of graphs and slides up here, which I realise most of you can probably not see, because when I was in the front, I couldn't see any of the other graphs or read them. But the one on the left, the bar graph with the blue vertical lines, is a graph of runoff into Perth's dams over the last 100 years. Now, you can't see the detail, but you can see that if you go back into the early part of those 100 years, some years were very wet and some years were very dry. And the engineering solution to that is to build increasingly large dams. So when you have wet years, you hold a lot of water that you use in a dry year. And the yellow line shows the long-term average that good water engineers used in this state up until the 1970s, which said that we got on average about 350 gigalitres, billion litres of water a year into Perth's dams. And that worked very nicely because up until that period, Perth used about 300 gigalitres a year, so we were pretty well right. Now, by the 1970s, we had a number of very dry years. Those of you who remember the 1970s, who may have been uni students at the time, in which case you may not remember the 1970s, but those of you who were not university students at that stage probably do, and you probably remember that Perth had some sprinkler bans at that stage. I know I was at high school and at uni in the 70s, and my job was always to move sprinklers, and we used the timer on the stove to tell us when to move the sprinklers. Now, at that stage, Perth's water supply started to change, and the water engineers realised that that long-term average runoff wasn't going to be the case going forward. And that's when the green line was put as our long-term planning number. And in more recent years, especially 2001, it was a year that was so dry and with so little runoff that we started to question many of the assumptions we'd made about Perth's water supply. Now, if you're looking at runoff into dams, the first thing you question is rainfall, and the graph that you probably can't read either, on the right-hand side, is Perth's rainfall over the last 100 years. The top pink line is the 100-year average cumulative rainfall line. The dotted blue line is the 30-year average, and the dotted dark blue line, which has last year's numbers superimposed on it, is the 10-year average. So last year, which most of us felt was not a bad year in water terms, is exactly the 10-year average, significantly below the 100-year average. So what does all this mean for Perth and for the Water Corporation and water supply? Well, what it means is that as an organisation we've had to go through enormous reform, and it's still going on. The first reform is about water security, because you're a pretty crummy water utility if you haven't got any water to sell. The second reform is about efficiency and productivity, because all the new water sources cost a hell of a lot more than the old ones. And the third reform is about working with our customers to understand what they want. So let's look at the first reform, because it's probably the most exciting, and that's reform of water security. Now here's another graph, and you might be able to read some of it. You can't read the headings, but let me explain. The ziggy-zaggy dotted line is exactly the same graph I showed you as a bar graph. It is a graph of the runoff into Perth's dams for the last 100 years or so. The top line that goes ever upward is a graph of Perth's population. The mustardy coloured line, which goes up and drops and up and drops, is a graph of the total amount of water supplied to Perth and to the IWSS, the Integrated Water Supply Scheme that supplies Perth. And let's have a little look at where that water comes from. This is rainwater falling into our dams and falling under gravity to your tap. This is surface water. And you can see that for a long time it was the bulk of our water supply, not so much these days. This is groundwater, which is water from one of the 3 or 4 aquifers beneath our feet that are used to supplement Perth's water supply, a little bit in the beginning, increasingly more and more as time has gone on. This is seawater desalination, which is an integral part of our water supply, about half these days, and I'll talk a bit more about that in a moment.
Sorry, your slides are not matching your...
Oh, aren't they? Yes, they are. The one here is. Sorry, I know it's hard to read. It's probably a bit busy. I hadn't realised it was... Would that help? Dim the lights? I don't know. Who knows how to dim the lights? That sounds technologically possible. It's the theme that matters, not the detail. And the last bit, which I've fitted in, which is that little tiny red bit you see there, that is groundwater replenishment, which I'll talk about in a moment, but that's taking our wastewater, treating it to a very high level, injecting it into the aquifers beneath our feet and using it for drinking water. Now, all of this is all very interesting, but I think it's hard to appreciate the rate of change of Perth's water supply unless you put it into the context of some very important dates in the water industry. Well, they're really important dates to me more than the water industry, and I'm in the water industry, so, how did that happen? Here we go. Let me go back to the beginning. I don't know what's happened here. No, I don't know. I don't know what's happened there. Can I get back to where I was? I'm sorry about this. What I was going to say is that the rate of change has been very rapid, and so it's really important that we acknowledge what's changed in our water supply as we consider going forward. Sorry about this. If we go to this one, or maybe this one, that's good. Thank you. That's fine. So that's our surface water, for those who couldn't see when the lights were up. That's our groundwater, that's our desalinated water, and that is groundwater replenishment, or recycled water injected in the aquifer. So I'm going to start with a very important year for the Water Corporation, and that is 1958. And the reason that's a very important year is that it's the year I was born. Now, in 1958, when my mother brought me home from hospital and put me in that baby bath, the water in the bath was 92% composed of dam water and 8% composed of groundwater. By 1980, which is also a very important year in the water industry because that is the year I signed on to start engineering here at UWA. So in the time it took me to grow up, go to school, pass my matriculation and come to university, the water in the shower I had when I came back from the tavern was 2/3 made up of dam water and 1/3 made up of groundwater. I then graduated, worked for Clough for many years, and in 2004 I joined the Water Corporation. So in the time it had taken me to play around with being a project manager and learn a bit about how the real world worked, Perth's water supply had swapped from 2/3 surface water to 1/3 surface water, and from 2/3 groundwater to 1/3 groundwater. And in the 10 years I've been at the Water Corporation, the change has been even more rapid. Last year, 7% of the water we supplied to Perth was from the dams, 42% was from groundwater, 50% was desalinated from the sea, and 1% was recycled wastewater injected into our aquifers. So let's talk a bit about desalination, because if you go to the East Coast, it's a swear word. In Western Australia, it's 50% of our water supply. It's the reason that we don't have onerous and draconian water restrictions, and it is also a source that is absolutely independent of climate. Now, no sub-editor for any newspaper can write the word desalination without the preface energy guzzling. And whilst it is undeniably true that to desalinate water from the ocean and use it as drinking water uses more energy than to allow water to fall from the sky into a dam and fall under gravity to your home, the fact is that if the water does not fall from the sky, you have to do something else. And it does use more energy, but I put it to you that we all make energy choices every day. Now, to desalinate seawater, for every litre of seawater, we end up with roughly half a litre of fresh water and half a litre of twice as salty seawater, which is returned to the sea. Our environmental requirements require that seawater, that twice as salty seawater, to be mixed to within 1% of background salinity within 50 metres of the discharge point. So our monitoring, which is extensive, shows no harm at all to the marine environment. But to desalinate that water, for every 1,000 litres of water we get, every 1,000 litres of fresh water uses about 3.5 kilowatt hours of energy. Our plants are world-class in their energy efficiency, and that's a pretty good result. Now, the average Perth home uses about 700 litres of water a day. So if all of that water was from the sea, if all of it was desalinated, it would use about 2 kilowatt hours to generate that amount of water. Now, all of us make choices about how we use our energy. I have 3 daughters living at home in their early 20s and late teens, and each of them straightens their hair every morning. The hair straightener they use is a 2.5 kilowatt hair straightener. So if the 3 girls each straighten their hair for 20 minutes each, they have used the same amount of energy to do their hair as the Water Corporation has used to desalinate all the water my family use in a day. All the toilet flushing, all the showers. Now, that is more energy than we used to use, but I put it to you that it's a choice we make. And my view is that clean, fresh drinking water delivered 24/7 to your home, no surcharge for public holidays, is a very sensible investment of energy. Now, my daughters might disagree, and they might think we should cut back on water and spend more time on our hair, but it's not a problem. I don't know, many of you know my father. It's not a problem my father has. He's managed to do very well without hair for about 60 years, I think now, or maybe slightly longer. So I put it to you, we all make energy choices, and it's a good one. Our desal plants are world-class in their environmental requirements. They're amazingly energy efficient, and we're enormously proud of them. We run them as a base load, and that's the most efficient way to run a reverse osmosis process. But the much more exciting thing, and the thing that I'm most proud of with the Water Corporation, is our the latest part of Perth's water puzzle. It's really the last piece of the jigsaw to climate-proof Perth. And that is to take the water that's already been through the complicated treatment process of our wastewater treatment plants. And this is sewage. This is the water from your toilet, your shower, your washing machine, all the stuff that goes down the plug hole. So we're not putting any fancy coating on it. This is the gross stuff. It's already been through the wastewater treatment plant, so it's at a quality that's suitable to meet environmental constraints to release to the sea. And we then put it through what is basically the same process as desalination, a reverse osmosis process, and then we take that basically pure water, blast it with UV light to kill the DNA of any living thing that managed to make it through the process, and then we inject it into the deep aquifers underneath Perth. And we can then abstract it in future, and when we abstract it from a bore in our existing bore fields, we actually drag that water through the sand underneath our feet for between 10 and 30 years. It'll take those water molecules to actually get to the bore fields, and then they're abstracted and treated as all the other groundwater. Now, if you've ever drunk water in most cities in the US and Europe, where they're river-based water systems, you will have drunk recycled water, because most cities treat their wastewater, put it into a river, and someone else lives further downstream and abstracts that water, treats it, and uses it for drinking water. Anecdotally, in London, every glass of water you drink has been through 7 sets of kidneys before yours. Now, nobody talks about that as recycled water because it goes through a river, which is a natural thing, and somehow that makes it okay. So what we're doing at the moment is putting that recycled water in an underground river where it flows through the sand, which is a pretty efficient other form of filtration to use for drinking water supply. Now, the joy of groundwater replenishment is that it grows with society. So as we have more and more people, we have more and more wastewater, which we can replenish and recycle. So it becomes a really good climate-independent source. It's not cheap. It's about the same cost at the moment as seawater desalination, but the energy component of it is less. So if you assume that energy costs are going to rise at a greater rate than other input costs, it's probably a good long-term product. Now, the water that we're creating through this process is very clean. My engineers cry and say, "Why are you putting my beautiful water in your dirty aquifer?" But the fact is that our aquifers, and the aquifers we're putting that water in, are generally about 1 kilometre deep. So that water falls under gravity. When we say we pump it into the aquifer, that's not quite true. We just put it 1 kilometre above the aquifer and let it fall under gravity. So it's a very energy efficient way to store our water, and we don't have to pipe it to get it to our bore field. It goes naturally underground. If we were to take a more direct potable concept and try to put it in our dams, we'd have to pump it up into the hills reservoirs, which uses a lot more energy. So under Perth, there are really, and this is very simplistic, and if there are hydrologists and water engineers here, I apologise for the simplicity, but there are basically 3 main aquifers under Perth. The superficial, which is where your garden bores are largely situated, which are replenished pretty much year by year, and which are not always of very good quality because there's a fair bit of fertilisers and chemicals used on people's gardens. The leaderville, which is a bit deeper, is used by some market gardeners and some industry and the Water Corporation. And then the very deep Yarragadee aquifer, which is only used by the Water Corporation. And it's a pressurised aquifer, so if we put water into it, we can pull that same water out somewhere else, bank it underwater where it doesn't get evaporated, and it's a really efficient way for us to kind of drought-proof Perth. I hate the phrase drought-proof because drought implies that our water needs and the current climate issues are a temporary aberration. Now, they may be a temporary aberration on a planet scale, but in terms of customers, it's not acceptable, I don't believe, to talk about drought. We have to talk about changing climate and climate resilience, because the fact is that the rainfall patterns indicate that we get significantly less rain than we used to. The climatologists tell us that it is still likely that we could get extreme storm events, and the good thing about a balanced water supply is we can bank that water in our dams if it ever does rain in biblical proportions and throttle back on the more expensive water sources, but we can also bank water underground. But the key part of making Perth drought-proof is not just about climate resilience, nor is it about water sources, but it's about changing our behaviours. And this is the area that I'm really proud of because it's a real partnership. It's a partnership between the Water Corporation, between every customer we have, and between so many industries in Western Australia. Now, in broad terms, since about the year 2000, the population of Perth has grown by about 1/3. and yet last year we supplied 8% less water than we did in 2000. Now this is for a lot of reasons, but the main one is that per capita water in each part of our state has dropped, and it's dropped because people have started to think about it. Now, that's because water-wise messages are everywhere you look. The biggest single change we made to our water supply, oh no, I haven't got a slide on it, was when we went to the 2-day-a-week permanent water efficiency measures. So we don't have sprinkler bans in this state, we have permanent water efficiency measures which have been in place for over 10 years. And prior to that, most of us chronically overwatered our gardens because we've forgotten left a sprinkler on, or we didn't really think about the fact that our gardens are on beach sand. And so once the sand gets wet, the water just keeps flowing through. So we have seen phenomenal changes in garden use, in the way we water our gardens, in the plants we select, in the urban form we have, in the way people use their outdoor amenity. All of this has changed, and it's changed because we've driven a lot of that change through partnerships with irrigators, with nursery associations, with the lawn association, with the turf growers, with every garden industry you can imagine, to make it almost socially unacceptable to be not water-wise. We've done a lot of work with the Plumbers Association, with household fittings, with the choice of appliances you can have in your home. In fact, if you install water-wise products in your home, a water-wise washing machine, a water-wise dishwasher, water-wise shower heads and toilets, you can drop your water use by 1/3 without any change at all in your amenity or lifestyle. And that's been the focus to date. There is still a long way to go. Perth is still the second highest per capita water using city in Australia, second only to Darwin, and who knew that they drank water in Darwin? So, but nonetheless they must, because they use a lot more of it than we do. So what all of that means is that we still have a long way to go. And our real worry is that we may have reached a saturation feeling with our customers, because our customer surveys tell us that 94% of our customers believe they are below average water users, which statistically means that there are 6% of you out there who are very, very bad. But more likely it is that we actually don't have a perception of the amount of water we use. People often suggest that we should mandate rainwater tanks. Now, a rainwater tank is very inefficient in dollar terms in Perth because our rain falls over such a short period of time that to have a meaningful impact on your water use from a rainwater tank requires an enormous rainwater tank, and that makes the cost per kilolitre of that water very high. However, we welcome anyone putting in a rainwater tank because the most important thing it does is give you a great visual signal of how much water you're using. And people put in a 1 kilolitre rainwater tank and tell me proudly that they're banking 1,000 litres of water for the summer. And when I tell them that the average Perth household uses 700 litres in a day, I think they're a bit depressed. So what we need to do as a society is get a better visual signal of what our water use actually looks like. And we do that through partnerships. So that's a very rushed version of the water story. There's a few other things, and that is that the cost of this water is a lot more expensive than the old water. If you replace water from the dams as our cheapest source, if it used to be 100% and now it's 7%, and that's all been replaced with manufactured water that's more expensive, means that we have put a big impost on our customers. So it's incumbent on us to be efficient. And we've done a lot of this efficiency over a journey in partnering with the private sector. Not selling the water corporation or selling our assets, but working in partnership with the private sector who are incentivised to find more efficient ways of operating and allowing some of our very clever engineers to come up with more clever ways of operating too. So I think we've partnered with virtually everyone in the state who's got some great ideas, and there are lots of other partners we've had than this, and this has been a progressive journey, and it's one that I think we've had great backing for across industry and government. But the final part of our water journey is about our customers. At the end of the day, we can only deliver what our customers want. And if our customers don't work with us and partner with us to lower this per capita water use, we are inevitably going to be building more and more and more very expensive sources which all our customers will have to pay for. And the best way to partner with customers is to have that sort of intimacy with them and understand what they're looking for. Now, we've moved into the online world, which has dubious benefits, I'm told, if it comes to newsletters, but it's a very good way to know how much water you're using. So we have a system called My Water, and I would encourage any of you who haven't logged on to go home, log on, and have a look at your history of water use and have a look at the way you pay your bills and the way your water's being used, and see if you can make some personal changes. It does make a difference, and whilst it seems a crazy economic model for me to advertise every year and spend millions of dollars on those advertisements to tell my customers not to buy my product, I actually do it because it saves all of my customers a lot of money in the long term. And I'll give you an example. We replan our country schemes, and we've got 132 different country schemes across this huge state, every 5 years on a rolling basis. And when I look at the planning work we were doing 5 years ago, based on the per capita water use we were planning then, we had a forward capital program that saw us spending over $800 million a year in the country alone. Through redoing that planning work and just reapplying the current 1/3 less per capita water use in most of those towns, we've deferred that capital program out by of the order of $200 or $300 million a year. So we save the cost of a desal plant every 5 years, which is about $1 billion, simply by lowering per capita water demand across all of our customer base. So that's the incentive to save water. Interestingly, when we talk to our friends in the electricity market, they tell us that their studies show that people scream at their children to turn off the lights because it saves energy, which saves money. But people save water not to save money, but because it's morally the right thing to do. Somehow we've got water positioned as a hearts and mind issue, not a financial issue, and I hope that that's always the case. So can I encourage each of you to go home, look at your sprinklers, check they're coming on 2 nights a week only, 3 if you have a garden bore. Don't run any station for more than 10 minutes, because more than that and the water's just going into the aquifer, which isn't the end of the world, but it's an expensive way to do it using my beautiful water. And have a think about how long you're in the shower. And when you figure out how to encourage teenagers how to have shorter showers, please write to me and tell me. Thank you.
While Sue has a passion for water, we also did some due diligence on Sue's background before inviting her along tonight, and we found out that she wouldn't refuse a carefully selected bottle of champagne. So straight after this, we'll present that to her. But please join me in thanking her for her presentation tonight. Simply remains for me to thank you for attending this second ordinary meeting, and I look forward to keeping you up to date with developments in Convocation as they occur before we meet again at the next special ordinary meeting. I'd like to thank Tracy Taylor, the convener of our Outreach Committee, as well as Juanita Perez in the Convocation Office, and the events team at the Office of Development and Alumni Relations for all their efforts in organising this first ordinary meeting for 2015. Also like to thank our pianist this evening, UWA graduate Rick Stern. Drinks and supper will now be served on the outdoor terrace just out through the doors on my left, and please stay and catch up with friends and colleagues in celebrating the 102nd anniversary of Convocation Day. Thank you very much for coming.